After the success of The Chosen, many assumed his life must be filled with joy, fans, fame, red carpets, award shows, spiritual rewards. And while it's true that he's found purpose in his work and a renewed relationship with God, what's also true, and far less spoken about, is the cost. The loneliness, the weight of a life lived with discipline and spiritual awareness that so few can relate to. Jonathan has said in multiple interviews that choosing a path of holiness changed everything. Not just the kinds of projects he accepts or how he approaches acting, but who he allows into his heart. That means romantic relationships, close, friendships, even daily social interactions. When you decide to center your life around faith in such a radical, intentional way, the world around you begins to feel smaller. The people who used to get you suddenly feel far away, and the ones who could understand your walk are few and far between. He described it in such a heartbreaking way, saying that he once believed he could date someone who didn't share his spiritual beliefs, that maybe they could compromise. That love would be enough. But the deeper he dove into his faith, the more he realized that shared beliefs aren't a side detail. They're the foundation. If two people don't agree on what matters most to them, God, prayer, the purpose of life, then they'll eventually drift apart. Jonathan said this not with anger, but with clarity. He admitted that some of his past relationships failed because he wasn't putting God first. And now that he's changed, he can't go back. "I can't date the same way anymore," he said. And you can feel the sadness behind that sentence. Because dating isn't just about finding someone attractive. For him, it's about finding someone who understands why he spends hours in prayer, why he chose to narrate rosaries and reflections on faith-based apps, why playing Jesus isn't just a job, it's a calling. And that calling makes everything else more complicated. Imagine being a woman trying to date Jonathan. He's kind, respectful, humble, and thoughtful, but also deeply committed to a kind of life that most people simply don't live. It's not just about going to church. It's about seeing everything, every decision, every moment, as an act of faith. That's intimidating. It requires a partner who not only believes in God, but lives as if God is the center of their every breath. And those people are rare. Jonathan said he's come to accept that. He's not looking for someone perfect. He's looking for someone willing to walk with him on this path of spiritual discipline, willing to ask big questions, willing to live a life of service, love, and reflection. But while he waits, he also carries the weight of solitude. He watches friends get married, raise children, build lives together, and he remains on the outside. Not because he's broken, but because he's made a promise to himself and to God that he won't settle. That promise is beautiful, but it's also incredibly difficult. He mentioned how exhausting it is to constantly give so much of himself to audiences, to fans, to productions, and return to a quiet home. There's no one to unwind with. No one to share a meal with after an emotional day on set. No one to say, "I'm proud of you," in those quiet moments of doubt. And what's perhaps most tragic is that the very role that brought him closer to God is also the role that has set him apart from the world. Playing Jesus means people see him differently. They put him on a pedestal. They assume he's untouchable, that his life must be full of joy and peace. But Jonathan has said plainly, it's isolating. It's strange to have people pray with you one day and forget that you're still a human being the next. To be admired and misunderstood at the same time. He talked about fans who project their own expectations onto him, forgetting that he's just an actor, a man with flaws, pain, desires, and fears. One of the most powerful things Jonathan shared was that he didn't even believe holiness was possible for someone like him. That's how far away from God he once felt. Before Tommy first The Chosen, he was grinding in New York and LA, doing voiceovers, small acting gigs, always chasing the next paycheck. He said he didn't think about what kind of projects he was doing. He just wanted work. God wasn't part of the decision-making process. But after his life changed, after he surrendered, he began to reframe everything. He said it started with his career, but it didn't stop there. It affected his relationships, his habits, even the way he spoke to strangers. he began to ask, what does it mean to live as if I belong to God? And that question reshaped his entire life. But it also came with loss. He couldn't date casually anymore. He couldn't keep certain friendships. He couldn't walk through life with blinders on. That clarity was freeing and heartbreaking, because the clearer his vision became, the lonelier his road became too. Jonathan isn't bitter. That's the remarkable thing. He talks about all of this with such grace, such peace, but also with longing. He's not ashamed to say he wants to be loved, that he wants to share his life with someone who truly understands him, not just the public persona, but the man behind the role, the man who gets tired, the man who worries, the man who prays for strength to carry the burdens he's been given. And right now, he carries those burdens alone. In the comments of his videos and interviews, fans say things like, I'll marry him, or he's perfect, but they don't realize that Jonathan isn't looking for adoration. He's looking for understanding, for real spiritual companionship, for someone who will sit in silence with him and pray, someone who believes that faith is not a phase, it's a way of life. That kind of love is rare, but he's holding out for it, and every day that it doesn't come, he learns to carry the loneliness with a little more strength. Sometimes fans forget that actors don't just turn off their characters like a light switch. Jonathan has spoken about how intense filming The Chosen can be. Some scenes leave him completely drained, emotionally and spiritually. He said that after filming certain moments, he couldn't even talk to people. He had to retreat, be alone, process everything. That's a heavy thing to carry without support. No spouse, no close partner, just silence. And while he's found peace in prayer, peace in his calling, it doesn't mean the ache goes away. It just means he's learned to live with it. That's what makes Jonathan's story so deeply human. He's not claiming to be a saint. He's not pretending to have it all figured out. He's just trying to be faithful, one day at a time. And sometimes that faith leads him through seasons of heartbreak, waiting, and silence. So the next time you see Jonathan Roumie smiling in an interview, remember that there's more behind that smile than you might realize. There's a man who carries the weight of playing Jesus, the burden of being misunderstood, and the ache of walking alone in a world full of couples and companionship. But he walks with God. And for now, that has to be enough. There's something deeply powerful about a person who chooses purpose over comfort, especially in a world that celebrates instant gratification. Jonathan Roumie could have chosen a very different path. With his talent and charm, he could have stayed in mainstream media, pursued roles in Hollywood films, built a brand around his looks or voice work. And yet, he walked away from all that, not because he couldn't succeed in that world. He absolutely could have, but because he felt the call to do something deeper, something eternal. That kind of calling comes at a price. It means saying no to easy opportunities. It means waiting for roles that align with your soul. And it means living a life that often feels more like a pilgrimage than a performance. Jonathan has become a vessel for stories that are rooted in faith, sacrifice, and truth. But what people often overlook is how much that costs him on a personal level. While his peers may be building careers with lucrative contracts and glamorous premieres, Jonathan is sitting with his Bible, praying over scenes that demand everything from him: his mind, his emotions, and most of all, his spirit. We live in a time when vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness, but Jonathan turns that notion on its head. In every interview, every podcast, every moment of silence he allows in a conversation, he shows us that strength can look like admitting you're tired, that holiness doesn't mean perfection, but persistence, that faith isn't loud, but steady. And behind all of this is a man who continues to wrestle with his own heart. He has said that surrendering to God was not a one-time act, but a daily decision. Every morning, he wakes up and recommits. He asks, "What does God want from me today?" And on many of those days, the answer is, wait. Wait for the right person. Wait for the next project. Wait for the moment when your pain will make sense. Waiting is one of the hardest spiritual disciplines. It's lonely. It's unclear. And it demands trust in something you cannot see. Jonathan has chosen to live in that space, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. And through that honesty, millions have connected with his journey. But as much as Jonathan's work inspires others, there's a shadow side to this fame. He has said that playing Jesus means people forget that he's just a man. They come up to him with tears in their eyes, asking for prayer, confessing their sins, looking for spiritual guidance. And while Jonathan is deeply compassionate, he's also human. He's admitted that it's overwhelming sometimes, that the expectations are so high, he worries he'll disappoint people just by being himself. Imagine carrying that. Walking into a grocery store or coffee shop and being approached not as Jonathan the actor, but as Jesus from The Chosen. Imagine the pressure of always being expected to say the right thing, smile at the right time, never show weakness, never have a bad day. It's no wonder he retreats after intense scenes. It's no wonder he's careful about who he lets into his life. Because fame built on faith is not the same as ordinary celebrity. It's heavier. It asks more of you. And sometimes it isolates you in ways you never saw coming. In the rare moments when Jonathan has spoken candidly about his loneliness, it's clear that it's not just about being single, it's about being unseen, not in the literal sense. Millions see him on their screens every week, but in the spiritual, emotional sense. He's searching for someone who doesn't just admire him, but understands him. Someone who gets what it means to wake up and pray. First, not scroll. Someone who understands why he takes months to fast or why he chooses silence over parties. Someone who won't just tolerate his faith, but live it with him. And that's not easy to find, especially when you're in the public eye, especially when people think they know you because they've seen your face on screen. That kind of loneliness is profound. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It lingers in quiet nights, in hotel rooms after press junkets, in long drives home from set. And Jonathan has said he's learning to live with that ache without letting it harden his heart. One of the most vulnerable moments came when Jonathan said he used to compromise. In his earlier years, he would accept relationships where faith was a side note, not a foundation. He hoped it would be enough, that maybe his faith could carry both of them. But it didn't. He learned the hard way that you can't build a spiritual life with someone who isn't spiritually alive. That realization was painful, but it also gave him clarity. He no longer blames those partners or sees those relationships as failures. He sees them as necessary steps on his journey, reminders of who he is and what he's truly seeking. He wants a partner who sees faith not as an accessory, but as the center of everything. Someone who will pray with him, challenge him, and grow with him. Someone who will walk beside him not just when things are easy, but when the calling is heavy and the path is narrow, and that path has only gotten narrower. As The Chosen grows in popularity, so do the pressures. The upcoming seasons are darker, heavier, filled with pain and betrayal. Jonathan has said that filming those moments leaves him emotionally raw, and yet he embraces them, because he knows that the story of Jesus isn't one of comfort, it's one of sacrifice. He's willing to go to those dark places because he believes in the power of the story. But who comforts the comforter? Who holds space for him when he's drained and vulnerable? That's the unanswered question. Right now, Jonathan holds space for others, fans, cast members, fellow believers. He encourages, uplifts, and prays. But he's still waiting for someone who will do the same for him. And in the waiting, he's learning more about himself than he ever imagined. You might think all of this sounds sad, but there's beauty in it too. There's something undeniably holy about a person who chooses integrity over convenience, who chooses truth over applause, who waits not because they have no other options, but because they know their heart is worth protecting. Jonathan Roumie is not perfect. He's said that again and again. But he's trying to live a life that reflects the one he portrays, trying to be faithful in a world that often rewards compromise, trying to find love without losing himself. And in that trying, he's found a kind of peace that fame could never give him. So when people ask, why is he still single? The answer isn't simple. It's not because he's too picky. It's not because he's too devoted to his career. It's because he's walking a path that demands depth, commitment, and shared values. And until he finds someone willing to walk that path with him, he's okay walking it alone. Because he knows he's not really alone. He knows God walks with him, even when no one else does. And maybe that's what makes Jonathan's story so powerful. It's not just a story of fame or faith or film, it's a story of quiet courage. The courage to wait, the courage to hope, and the courage to keep loving in a world that often misunderstands love. There's a quiet war that often rages inside a person who's chosen to walk a narrow road, a road that calls for devotion, integrity, restraint, and above all, purpose. Jonathan Roumie has found himself at the intersection of public praise and personal sacrifice, the face of Jesus to millions, and yet, off camera, he is a man still wrestling with what it means to be chosen himself, not just for a role, but for a life that demands more than applause. His vulnerability in interviews doesn't come from a desire to be dramatic. It comes from the raw reality of holding a calling that doesn't always reward you in the ways the world expects. There's no trophy for self-denial, no spotlight for waiting, no Instagram moment for choosing holiness over popularity, but Jonathan keeps choosing it anyway. And in that choice, he stands apart, not just as an actor of faith, but as a witness to something higher, something harder, something sacred. It's strange how the world reacts to someone like Jonathan. On one hand, he's admired deeply, seen as a kind of spiritual celebrity. On the other hand, people forget that he's not a symbol, but a soul. He's not invincible. He's not glowing with supernatural peace every moment. There are days when the silence is loud, when prayers go unanswered, and when the loneliness hits a little harder than usual. He's talked about how being single, at 50, while playing the Prince of Peace, brings about its own kind of paradox. People assume he must have everything figured out, that portraying Jesus must mean he walks through life effortlessly. But it's the opposite. The more he immerses himself in the story of Jesus, the more he confronts his own fragility. The scenes that require him to carry the weight of betrayal, crucifixion, and sacrifice, they don't leave when the cameras stop rolling. They linger. They press into his heart. And as he's admitted, they make him question, they make him pray harder, and they make him look inward in ways he never imagined. Some people act for fame. Jonathan acts for faith, and the cost of that choice is becoming clearer the further he walks. You see, when your career is tied so closely to your spiritual identity, every move you make carries the pressure of representation. He doesn't just play a character, he represents a belief, a savior, a hope that millions cling to. That's an enormous burden to bear, and yet Jonathan bears it with humility. He said that sometimes he feels unworthy of it, that he doesn't always feel holy enough, good enough, disciplined enough to be the vessel people think he is. And yet, maybe that's why he's so effective, because he doesn't fake perfection. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He just keeps showing up, in prayer, in performance, in service to a mission far bigger than himself. But while the mission is powerful, the man carrying it is still very much alone. It's not the dramatic kind of loneliness we see in movies. It's the kind that lives in subtle moments. Coming home to an empty apartment after a press event, having no one to debrief with after a hard day on set, sitting in silence after a prayer, wishing there was someone next to you whispering, "Amen." Jonathan's talked about how much he values community, but also how hard it is to find real connection when people already think they know you. Everyone sees the role. Few take time to see the man, and fewer still can match his level of spiritual hunger. When you've committed your life to God, it changes your standards. You can't just date for fun. You can't enter a relationship just to escape the quiet. And Jonathan knows this. That's why he chooses solitude over compromise, because he's learned that spiritual loneliness with God is still better than worldly companionship without him. And what about the future? Jonathan doesn't pretend to know what's coming. He's surrendered that too. He doesn't chase opportunities anymore. He waits for the ones that are God-breathed. But that doesn't mean it's easy. The industry still tempts him. There are still scripts that offer money, fame, and recognition, but no soul. And he turns them down because he's not interested in feeding his ego. He's interested in feeding his spirit. That kind of decision-making is rare in today's entertainment landscape. It makes him a mystery to many producers, a risk to investors, and a legend to fans. But Jonathan doesn't do this to be legendary. He does it to be faithful. And that means even when he doesn't see the reward, even when the crowds stop cheering, even when the season ends,